You break my heart. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and here we are, the final installment of our four-part review of the Leica SL 3 years after launch. My ambition for this series, as is so often the case, was to find fresh insights into a critically important and very different camera for Leica. Otherwise, what would be the point? But before we begin in earnest, just a quick reminder from our new Department of Friendly Neighborhood Commerce that every time you purchase anything through one of our B&H affiliate links down below in the Show More section, you are automatically entered to win the Luxley Viola on-camera bicolor LED panel with diffuser. This is an item I first tested with a little help from my friends because I needed just that kind of capability and liked it so much we decided to give one away. It's an easy way for you to show your support of what we're doing, and it's an easy way for us to show our appreciation back to you. We'll announce the winner May 22nd. I'll put in a link to the review down below and up above. Thank you, B&H, for your support as well. So, okay. When the SL arrived at the Batcave, courtesy of Leica, thanks guys for that, enough time had elapsed since its launch. Enough reviews had been done. Check out, for example, Christian Dowling's excellent tutorial video for the basics. I'll put in a link below for that as well. I thought, probably like many of you, I already had the basic outlines of the camera, which could be reduced to classic Leica and nothing like a Leica. Incredible build quality, strong industrial design, superb optics, extraordinary precision, unmatched heritage on the one hand. Let me just pause here to add gorgeous, subtle rendering, both in stills and 4K video, that I worry isn't really there, that I'm projecting into the results. Yet each time I pixel peep, I still see the differences compared to the outstanding imagery we've been able to get from the most recent Sony and Panasonic cameras and optics. Yet, on the other hand, in contradistinction to the cameras that made Leica a revered brand, the 1925 Leica 1 and 1954 Leica M3, large, brutish, heavy, electronic, and complex. Not a rangefinder. But in either case, expensive. $7,000 for the body alone at launch, $6,000 now. Almost as much again for the 24-90 2.8 to f4. We will be talking about this. But from the outset, I also thought the SL might be Leica's 21st century attempt to finally break out of the gilded cage the company's signature success had in some ways become. That is, to move beyond the mechanical rangefinder stills cameras that established the brand's reputation, adored to this day by its most ardent fans, to create a new flagship for this age, which would be the unapologetic Leica of stills video hybrids, which, with its take no prisoners, love it or leave it minimalist and mirrorless design, 529-point autofocus system and fly-by-wire lenses, high-end video specs including DCI 4K, 8-bit 420 internal, 10-bit 422 external, 4.4 megapixel EVF that is by far the best EVF I've ever seen, especially in the light, peerless build quality, built-in Wi-Fi and GPS, 11 frames per second shooting when exposure and focus are locked, a robust set of video assists missing only false color, and in-your-face insistence that the best professionals don't need more than 24 megapixels was pretty darn ballsy, impressive in 2015. And refreshing given Leica's previous journeys into the wilderness of rebodied Minoltas and limited edition vanity M6s. I mean, when it launched, the SL basically wiped the floor with Canon's then current $12,000 1DC and undercut it on price. When have we ever seen that from Leica? By almost half. Even if the SL had precisely one lens, the 24-90 2.8 to f4 Vario-Elmarit available at launch. Hold that thought. But as I said last time, history has a way of accelerating. Product cycles shorten. Within months, Canon announced the 1DX Mark II, which also recorded DCI 4K for $6,000 and had the advantages of an enormous EF mount lens ecosystem, a nominally lower price point, and unequivocally superior autofocus. The full-frame 42.5 megapixel phase detect AF Sony A7R II had actually been announced months ahead of the SL for half the price, even if it couldn't record 10-bit 422 nor DCI 4K, and by comparison would prove an ergonomic nightmare. You know what has happened since, especially in the last year or so. Panasonic has released the $2,000 10-bit 422 internally recording, 5-axis image stabilized, 3.7 megapixel EVF, micro four thirds, GH5. Sony just started shipping for the same $2,000 the full frame, 24 megapixel, 15 stops dynamic range, improved color science, improved ergos, outstanding high ISO performance, excellent hybrid AF equipped, 5-axis image stabilized A7 III, not to mention the $3,200 A7R Mark III. And, of course, in 2018, any company who wants them has access to computer-aided optical design and manufacturing. And really, that's the rub. If the original premise of the first Leicas, continued with the mid-century M series, was to enable travel photography by being small, light, and simple with superb optics, there are any number of cameras from which to choose these days that are smaller, lighter, and, you can argue, approach the optical quality of the stellar full-frame SL with Vario-Elmarit at 1/5 the price, like, say, the micro four thirds Panasonic GX9 with a Leica DG Vario-Elmarit 12-60, 2.8-4, or the APS-C Sony 6300 with a Sony 24-105 f4G OSS. Notice I did not mention easier to use, so hold this thought too. But perhaps the biggest challenge of all to a camera like the SL in today's digital world is that sensors and their processors are not simply a different way of capturing and storing images compared to the old days of chemical emulsions and processing, the days when Leica made its name. Unlike film, sensors in mirrorless cameras have a direct impact on frame rate and, most importantly in my book, autofocus performance and speed. Now, I don't care much about frame rate in this case because the SL doesn't have the long autofocus glass that pro sports photographers need anyway. But I do care about autofocus performance because it is so central to the SL's reason for being and important to the portraiture and street photography that I do. While the SL's autofocus is nothing to sneeze at, and that gorgeous EVF makes manual focus unmatched by any other camera, even if I never figured out how to get peaking turned on with the Summit 90mm f2.4 I borrowed as well, it is simply outdone by newer, less expensive cameras. Sony's IAF remains an extraordinary accomplishment. Canon's dual pixel autofocus, its reputation precedes it. This really is a conundrum for high-end, lower-volume cameras like the SL or, say, Hasselblad's X1D. The appeal of an upfront investment in an instrument that will last for many years and become as comfortable and intuitive as a man and his horse riding as one competes with the alternative strategy of trading in higher volume, less expensive cameras in pursuit of ever faster, more sensitive, constantly refined technology, beginning with the latest sensors. Back in the film days, all cameras were created equal, except for optics, handling, reliability, and eventually motor drive speed. That's because for any given film format, the cameras all had equal access to all film emulsions. Today, the gap in optics continues to narrow, a function of computer-aided design and manufacturing and software-driven correction. The gap in reliability has narrowed, again, a function of computer-controlled manufacturing. And the gap in image quality and frame rate has narrowed, a function both of sensor design and degraded image quality when viewed through the web. But the differences in autofocus precision and reliability and low-light performance remain, for now, significant. Thus, it is easy to argue that the 42.5 megapixel Sony a7R III or the 24 megapixel backside illuminated a7 III have superior image quality on the basis of resolution or low light performance respectively on the one hand, or on the other, superior IQ due to superior autofocus performance, at least in continuous autofocus for, say, movie mode. Like the Panasonic's, the SL's autofocus for stills is very snappy, though even in stills it doesn't track quite the same way that the Canons or the Sonys do, and just isn't nearly as good for video tracking. Yes, the SL is heavy, especially compared to the Leica 3A or our little Sony a6300, a camera which I think in some ways is an homage to the first Leica. It's also heavy compared to even the biggest Micro Four Thirds cameras, any other APS-C camera, and pretty much any mirrorless full-frame camera. In fact, over the course of several hours wandering through the David Bowie exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum a couple of weeks ago, the SL with that 24-90 zoom slung over my shoulder really began to weigh me down. I didn't enjoy it. But when you take a closer look, the SL is neither as large nor heavy as one might think, previous reviews or the comments I just made notwithstanding. Like this. Even if the SL weighs much more than an A6300, an A7 III, or a GH5, and is gargantuan compared to my little Leica 3A, it isn't much bigger. And it is dramatically smaller and lighter than Canon 1D or Nikon D5, and a couple of ounces lighter than the digital medium format Fuji GFX 50S. While the 24-90 Elmarit is much heavier and larger than any one or two ordinary full-frame primes, ditto Micro Four Thirds zoom, like the Vario-Elmarit 12-60 2.8 to f4 for the Panasonic GH5, GH5S, and G9, it is not so much larger, even if it is much heavier, than Sony's excellent full-frame 24-105 f4 GOSS. It is not much larger, but noticeably heavier than Canon's still outstanding 24-70 constant aperture f2.8 and Sony's 24-70 2.8 G Master. It is neither particularly larger nor heavier than a Fuji 110mm f2 for the GFX 50S, let alone a second lens like the 23mm f4. Hold that thought too. Of course, the Fujis give you dramatically shallower depth of field on the GFX 50S. The Sony and Canon are constant aperture, and the 24-90 is as or more expensive than any of the two lenses I just mentioned combined, even those two Fujis. For Leica purists, the real issue isn't the price of any of this. It's the size and weight of the glass. Because when you put up any of the SL glass against diminutive, jewel-like Leica lenses from the original screw mount or M mount series, 24-90, or even a prime like the Summilux SL51.4, it's understandable if they blanch. Other than image quality, build quality, and typography, they are anything but Leica-like. In fact, you can argue that they are much more Canon or Nikon or Sigma-like in their size and heft than any Leica lens. Except, of course, for the S series. To which I would say I understand and agree. But this is the double-edged sword of progress, isn't it? Autofocus, zoom range, full-frame coverage, and a commitment to Leica build and optical quality left little room, I imagine, for the engineers to negotiate size. If you're not a Leica purist, well, the size and weight and price of that glass will give you more than a few moments pause. Especially when a company like Fujifilm offers a Micro Four Thirds coverage prime like their brilliant little 75mm f1.8. But if that's you, you already know the SL isn't aimed at you. In fact, Leica is so expensive that the hard reality is this. You could buy 3 Panasonic GH5s, or Sony A7 IIIs, or Fuji XH1s for the price of a single SL, and 3 or 4 brilliant fast primes for them, including lenses by Leica, Zeiss, Voigtlander, and others, for the price of the Vario-Elmarit alone. Or you could buy just one of those other cameras with 1 or 2 of those lenses and then take one heck of an adventure with the savings. The questions, of course, are: what are your priorities? What is your budget? And what are the advantages of the SL worth to you? For some people, those answers will cause wholesale flight from the camera. For others, the SL will be an irresistible object. For me, the physical experience of and talismanic resonance of manipulating the SL are what get me going and give me pause. The design philosophy of the SL resonates with me, from the emphasis on seeing what you're shooting to its minimalist design, software interface, and tactile sensations across all surfaces and controls. The SL speaks to me. I want fewer menu choices. I want fewer buttons. If I do need to customize, I don't want fiddly, generically labeled buttons like FN1 or C2. A menu system and touch interface as responsive and intuitive as an iPhone's, we're not quite there yet on that last one. Otherwise, the SL delivers. While at first the 4 big oblong buttons on the back seemed odd, it became apparent to me with time that this is a very clever and quick solution. It is to me a dramatic improvement over other camera designs littered with those function buttons. It's fast, and once you get it, that's it. No more than 2 button pushes to get to any menu. Long button presses can be customized so that ISO, for example, is just a long press away without cluttering the top or having to menu dive first. Robust, meaty buttons, dials, and a single on-off switch. The best camera joystick I've ever used. I mean, with just the right feel and precision. A truly joyful stick. No. That just sounds wrong. It's clear to me that the SL's designers assumed that the most important things to a photographer or filmmaker are framing and focusing and then exposure, and they are right. Though I'd need more time with it to become at one with the camera, and I'd make the time for the SL. The sub-LCD panel works on this camera. Again, for me, your mileage may vary. Better than it works on the Fuji XH1 or Panasonic G9. Though I wish it did have the always-on capability, the legibility of the Fuji, and the backlight on-command capability of the Panasonic. The dual card slots just work. The slick battery on the bottom, okay. The remote app for iOS is simple, straightforward. I didn't look into tethering, but I'm glad that Leica offers both the software for it and a USB 3.0 connection to it. No flippy screen. Though I have to say, in a modestly irrational kind of way, I understand why. It just wouldn't be the same. On the other hand, it looks like the upcoming Atomos Ninja 5 could be the perfect complement to the SL, just 5 inches diagonally and capable of handling the SL's 10-bit 422 4K signal. But yeah, the Panasonic GH5 and GH5S already handle that internally. Hold that thought. And, oh yeah, still, once again, the image quality is sublime. So, who is this camera for? Interesting. With the SL, I find myself thinking of my final film camera days of the late 1990s. Back then, we lived in Europe. My go-to camera lens combination for travel was a Canon EOS 3 with motor drive in both the 28-70 f2.8 and 70-200 2.8Ls. I loved them. They all fit in a Billingham bag that distributed the weight well. Many of my favorite family shots of all time were taken with that combo. If you'd been active back then, you might have made different choices, which is fine. But I think you'd have been hard-pressed to find a 35mm kit yielding really better results. At least on the basis of the gear. I'm sure there were many people more skilled than I, just as there are today. Sure, I could have paid dramatically less for a point and shoot that would have used the exact same 35mm film, but I wanted images for a lifetime. And that combination, good or bad, inspired me. Everything about that time, place, and stage of life inspired me. I think that for the well-heeled enthusiast, the SL with 24-90 might be this era's version of that Canon kit, the ultimate travel pairing. The Leica is actually lighter, smaller, faster, and produces dramatically better images and stellar 4K video. The slightly longer top end and wider bottom end of the 24-90 obviate the desire to carry the 90-280. I rarely use the 70-200 all the way to 200, but often stretched above 70 for portraits, and I wished I'd gotten down to 24 back then. And 2.8 or even f4 in a full-frame camera while traveling will usually be enough for most people from a depth of field perspective. If you were a photojournalist or combat photographer today, this one camera lens combination with its incredible build quality, weather sealing, image quality, peerless EVF, and simpler interface than any other comparably capable camera could be all you want or need. But let's do a reality check, because there are plenty of people who would tell you, get something like a Sony RX100 Mark V with a 1-inch sensor and you're good to go. Or just use your iPhone with, again, plenty left over for travel expenses. Or a Panasonic G9. You don't need more than that even if you make the cover of Sports Illustrated or National Geographic. An RX10 Mark IV, Panasonic FZ2500, yada, 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 yada. They might tell you, in the real world, there are simply too many other better combinations of price and performance. And they might tell you specifically, what photojournalist or combat photographer wants to futz around with an external recorder, more batteries, more cables, to get that 10-bit 422 file when you can pick up GH5 for a third of the price and half the weight, and it can record that same signal internally? You know what? I'd agree. There's merit to those arguments. Full stop. The contrast detect only autofocus hunts to the point of exasperation in low light and doesn't track in video mode particularly well even in good light. Fortunately, face tracking in video is better. I found it better than the flagship Panasonic GH5, GH5S, and G9 in episode 2 of this series. Or was it 3? I was astonished to learn that the SL breaks up continuous DCI 4K recording into 5-ish minute clips. I don't know if this is true at other resolutions, and I had neither the time nor inclination to check, but this is a pain, especially when syncing separately recorded audio. MorphCut, one of my go-to plugins for Final Cut Pro 10, choked on and randomly obliterated clips in my timeline, costing me hours of re-editing until I finally figured out it was the culprit. Safety tip: Final Cut Pro's 10's Flow had no such problems. I was chagrined to open the port cover, only to find that if I wanted to plug in an external mic or a pair of headphones, I'd have to buy a $175 adapter and plug that in first. Not good. I want fewer things to lose, not more. And whether I'm affluent or not, I don't want to pay more to lose things. I was nonplussed to realize that the outer diameter of the 24-90 in relation to the bottom of the camera plate is such that I couldn't use a Cartoni or Sochler style long plate. That the touch interface is limited to tap to focus and pinch to zoom in or out during stills playback. That I couldn't figure out how to get HDMI out to a recorder that included screen information until Leica got back to me and told me, no, we don't have that yet. That the selection points on screen weren't granular enough for the usual real-world test I like to do on autofocus tracking performance. That I couldn't get focus peaking to work with adapted Leica M glass like the Sumerit 90mm f2.4 with the Leica M2L adapter, even though it has electronic connections. That I didn't even like the Sumerit M90 2.4 rangefinder lens on the SL body, even though I adore it and the 35mm Summicron and 90mm Elmarit I bought for my M8. It felt a bit like attaching tail fins from a 57 Chrysler 300, really nice tail fins, to a 2018 Rolls-Royce, each brilliant and breathtaking in their own right, but quite mismatched in look and feel when mashed into a single combination. The SL won't be in the zone until it's got a set of properly scaled primes worthy of the body. How many times have I said something like that now? I understand the challenge of engineering really great in-body image stabilization in a small, full-frame body, but once you've experienced great IBIS, it's tough to go back, especially if you're thinking about adapted manual non-IS Leica glass from the M, R, or S lines. Its absence in the SL is a missed opportunity. And as I mentioned moments ago, it did take me a while, let's face it, I still need more time, to get truly comfortable with the few, so minimal they're not even labeled buttons and dials the SL does have. I'm not complaining about them. But this did lead to some unexpected results, like what at first felt like ghost in the machine changes in exposure compensation, or a cropped viewfinder while shooting video until I sorted it. Which leaves us where, precisely? Well, 3 years on, it's fair to say that the Leica SL is still a work in progress, which, yet again, to me, makes it quintessentially Leica in that it will take a number of generations to hone it into what will become perfection for some, extravagance or profound irrelevance for others. Cutting-edge autofocus, a set of primes, a set of outstanding tutorial videos will help. So will IBIS. And if not a flippy screen, maybe a waist-level finder, a right-angle finder, something. The fact is, the SL ain't no M, nor a GH5, not an A7 III or A7 R3, not a Nikon D850, a Canon 5DSR, a Hasselblad X1D, Fuji GFX 50S, XH1, or XT2. It's not a lot of things, but so what? I freaking love this camera. I love it because it aims so high. I love it because so much is right, and its basic thesis, make the complex simple, make the superb accessible, is exactly right. I love it because it is a bold departure, a true break from the M6. I love it because I think it is all Leica, well, except for the size and weight of the SL glass, reimagined to solve a different problem than the original Leica 1, but still designed to solve a real problem. Outstanding image quality for stills and video for photographers wherever the opportunity takes them. And, oh yeah, that other problem the Leica 1 and the Leica M3 were designed to solve as well. A way forward for the business. As I've said a number of times now, the SL has a revelatory EVF, the best I've ever peered through. It strikes me that the SL and iRes are joined at the hip in the same way that M and rangefinder are synonymous. If Leica can stay ahead of everyone else on this front alone, that will be exciting. And once more with feeling, the SL has the best dials and buttons and joystick connected to the best autofocus point selector I've ever used. In the same way that the mechanical Leicas defined precision feel. It has the simplest, cleanest menu I've ever seen outside of the Hasselblads. In the same way, the original Leica was dramatically simpler to use than the speed graphic. I love that the SL's industrial design reflects how the shifting balance between hardware and software changes the relationship between form and function of our era. In its rounded grip, the SL can be seen as an homage to the form follows function design of the original Leica's rounded ends with radius set to match the rolled film within. In its squared, linear body, the SL can be seen as a nod to the pixel. How many times do I have to say I love the combined SL and 24-90 image quality? Intellectually, I know the broad outlines of the sensors and codecs and how they compare to others, and frankly, I didn't expect to see much difference in output at base ISO. But both Claudia and I immediately noticed, on a 5K screen, a more organic feel to the base ISO 4K DCI footage of, surprise, it's not a surprise now, I mentioned it earlier, episode 2, I think, shot entirely on the SL in face recognition autofocus mode with the 24-90 wide open, and in our stills. I'm talking color, which I usually don't, tonality, which I usually don't, and sharpness. I guess 14 bits can make a difference in stills, and 10 bits can make a difference in video, even without pixel peeping. I'll be darned. And maybe things are happening in the Maestro engine of which I'm unaware. Now, that wouldn't surprise me because I've made no effort to understand any image processor. Even so, I'll be the first to admit that a number of today's cameras are so tweakable and web delivery of the images we consume so compression heavy that I can't imagine being unable to get close with a modicum of effort either by tweaking settings in camera or working in post. Then again, if you don't have to, why bother? Most importantly, I love the SL because every time I pick it up, the modern incarnation of a century of art, war, design, bravery, betrayal, personalities, revolution, progress, family, business, social movements, the fits and starts of humanity floods my brain and whispers, do better. Make it count. Which brings us back to the beginning when I promised to evaluate the SL's camera and talisman, though I acknowledge there is much I did not cover in this review. As a camera, as an image capture device, the SL is a dramatic step forward for Leica in very heavy competitive seas. While the tactile qualities of the body and the EVF are, once more, the best I've ever had, and the image quality is superb, IQ has become so good in so many cameras that very, very few people would notice technical difference between its output and that of camera and lens combinations costing half, a quarter, or even a tenth as much, depending, of course, on image size, viewing distance, viewing medium, original capture conditions. You know the drill. Except, I'll just say it, sensor technology continues to evolve so rapidly that midway through 2018, now, Panasonic's Micro Four Thirds GH5S, a variant of the original GH5 designed specifically for low-light performance as a video camera with its limited 10.2 megapixel sensor, outperforms the full-frame SL when it comes to video at high ISOs. I did not expect that. As I said earlier, that's the rub. We now live in an era of circuits, not silver halide. Similarly, the SL's contrast detect AF system, like any contrast detect system, can't match the best hybrid phase detect AF systems out there from Canon and Sony, though it is marginally better in face recognition than the flagship pannies. People who work with the SL will recognize both the power of its differences and the limitations of its now older sensor and autofocus technologies, and the work remaining to make the distance between intent and execution even shorter. People like us will wish it had a full selection of fast autofocus primes with manual clutches and hard stops. Access to the full range of MR and S glass via adapter is a good, if compromised, starting point. But again, until the SL line is rounded out, it will be an incomplete system. And yes, I do wish the lenses were smaller and lighter. On the other hand, when people talk about the price, I kind of shrug. As a businessman, as a human being, I understand margins, unit volume, manufacturing experience curves, blah, 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 and treating employees well, treating people the way you would want to be treated. This last bit, corporate culture, is something which, if you've watched parts 2 and 3, you know I believe to be another core strand of Leica DNA. I think Leica charges what they need to charge in order to remain in business, do right by the people who design, build, sell, and support their products, take prudent risks, hopefully do right by the people who buy their gear, and give us some of the most interesting cameras and lenses in the market. Live long and prosper. If the SL system resonates for you and you can afford it, get it. If you can't afford it, that's okay. There are amazing alternatives out there for much less money. And if you've been watching me for a while, you know that I often say, yes, it's about the gear. But no, it's not about the gear. It's about the people. Cartier-Bresson and Hitchcock made do with a lot less. Although, if I'm brutally honest with myself, if Leica made a baby SL, smaller, lighter, a handful of small primes, smaller, lighter, brought autofocus and low-light performance on par with Sony's A7 III, I don't need to be piggy, I don't need more, and priced it like a CL, OMG, really, I think it would be the last camera I bought for a very, very long time. With all of this said, if I were a betting man, I'd bet the SL becomes a much more successful initiative to break free of the M6 than was the R8 of the late 1990s. Finally, as a talisman, which I define as a concretization and embodiment of what photography has been and can be, a reminder of the totality of the human experience, urging us on to make better imagery, to make us better, as an inspiration to create with premeditation, with seriousness, with joy, with perspective, to go out into the world and capture it. Man, the SL does it for me. And what can I say? I love the Leica story and my very small personal history with it. All of which, in the end, makes the SL a bit of a heartbreaker. I want one, but I can't justify the expense for me. I want one, but I want small, fast native primes. I want one, but I want better autofocus and low light performance. I want one, but I want a smaller, lighter body. I want one, but is there any way we can get rid of that what hump, Igor communications hump on the top plate?
You know, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I'm a rather brilliant surgeon. Perhaps I could help you with that hump.
What hump?
I imagine myself a much younger man, unattached. The Leica SL, an impossibly beautiful, brilliant, ethereal, complicated woman, floating through the atrium of a too expensive, if you have to ask, old world European hotel. All eyes in that room are riveted on her. I catch my heart in my throat. But then with a wan smile, I slowly turn back to the table in l'addition for the single café au lait I can actually afford. What was I thinking, I say to myself. It will never be, I say to myself. I am not worthy, I say to myself. She'd ruin me. And then, but it's okay. I get up, turn away, and the world is fine. I want to give a special shout out to Leica for letting me hold on to the camera and lens for far too long, sending along the Sumer at 92.4 with adapter on top of that so I could explore some of my deepest camera fantasies. For Three Blind Men and an Elephant, I'm Hugh Brownstone. See you next time. Maybe I should take a look at the CL.